Welcome to Western Tabletop. This is an HMG special. You have seen the G&T specials, but now you have the one and only Jack Daniels. You have Jacob and Daniel on the call, and we're going to bring to you some more lovely bolt action, tactics, theory crafting, everything you need to know to play this game. We're going to dig right into exactly what Dan's got in his head about how to play bolt action. Today we're going to really cover board control, which is a topic that we've brought up quite a few times in the past, but do want to focus on specifics on what you can do to improve your game when it comes to placement, and what are the threats, the objectives, and everything that's important about a mission to actually succeed on the table. But before we get into that, it has been a little bit of time since we've caught up. Anything new in the hobby world for you, Dan?
Let's see. So there's a couple of events that are on the horizon that I'll actually get to play in one for a change, which I'm looking forward to. That's at Southern Thrust for the boys down at Albany in the Lindial store, I think it is.
Mm-hmm.
But they've got a game store down there that they've set a little tournament up in, and I gotta say the terrain setups that we get to play on that day, they're looking very, very nice. So I'm looking forward to being able to enjoy. The theatre selectors and stuff were quite open, so we'll do a recap episode, I'm sure, with probably all four of us across that. Hobby-wise, I've finished painting some American Civil War stuff and starting to progress through my painting queue of miniatures, which is fantastic. Really tossing up now what is the next bolt action piece that I want to work on now that my Bulgarians are finished.
Does that mean extra Bulgarians or a new force or something else?
It may end up being not necessarily a new force, but the painting of one of my existing forces that I've got. That so I might do, for example, I've got some Japanese that are there at the moment. No bamboo spear fighters, just a more regular sort of army force. But yeah, I've got those that I want to just do up nicely and just try and get them moved from where they are, which is essentially base coated, through to a nice level of completion. If I can do that across all of them, that's about another 1,500 points worth of Japanese army that'll be painted up, and I've got all the paints ready to go off the painting guides. Nice and simple tabletop, just get them done.
1,500 in Japanese is actually quite a few models, because there's not many expensive units outside of infantry, which will have 10 or 13 models each per squad anyway. And there isn't
I didn't count how many.
When I last looked at Japanese, there actually isn't all that many Warlord models for anti-tank guns and all that kind of stuff. You do need to go digging to find the extra pieces that are in the rulebook. So it is a little bit of a tricky thing, but the 3D printing will get you where you need to be if there's anything that's gone missing. Oh, most of the tanks are covered with Warlord resin and that kind of stuff.
And even a lot of the like the fixed artillery pieces and weapon teams and things like that, there's a lot of alternative third-party manufacturers out there that cover them, and there's a stack who, I've used some of their products before, through different means, and they're not quality-wise. There's no issues there, right? Like there's not really many third parties on the market at all that I would look at and go, oh, the quality's not great. I'm like, I just don't see them for the World War II stuff. Like, and that's probably because most of the people that are interested in it are actually interested in it, right? And
yeah. And it's not just a game piece.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Speaking of the Japanese, do you have any how's it going to come together, the basing? Are we thinking like jungle Singapore kind of thing? Is it going to be like Pacific Beach theme kind of stuff? What do you envision?
I'm going backwards and forwards. The idea of having them as a coastal defense force is quite attractive.
Yep.
and so that naturally would have an element of jungle vegetation or jungle-ish vegetation. But I'm thinking, shoreline coastal sort of stuff. So it'll almost be not quite the same. I was almost thinking just flat yellow sand, but instead of being a desert, you put a little bit of water and a tree on, like a bit of bush on there, and you go, it's island coastal for the Pacific space. So it's probably not that yellow. The desert yellow is probably a bit strong.
Yeah, a bit more paler.
Probably a bit paler.
Yeah. Cool. And then, for me, I am finally discovering allies. I don't know what it is. I've tried Americans a couple of times. Probably painted them 3 times since I've started bolt action. And I don't hold on to them for very long. I don't know what it is, but and I had a hard time. I've done Soviets before, and Brits are probably something that I know the least about. But got a good deal with some British powers. Just watched A Bridge Too Far for the. I watched it once when I was a kid, and I can't really remember it, but I probably watched it in the last week or so, and I'm like, yes, I think I've made the right decision. It's a really, really good movie.
It is.
It's absolutely amazing that I watched some videos on it about creating A Bridge Too Far and the extent that they did, like keeping the historical accuracy. The paradrops that they used just as many planes as they did in the war, and they filmed it all in kind of one shot, all right there in Holland. And a lot of places are real where they actually filmed it and where it happened. And almost all of the actors had an opportunity to talk with many of the famous people on the British side who fought there and really studied under them to actually portray who they were, and were very careful on selecting their language. They wouldn't, throw out quotes that person would have not naturally said, and these kind of things. So I thought that was actually really cool. I don't know what it is, but practical effects really do it for me. I'm not really super into CGI, even though they do the kind of like theatrical death, when they get shot and that kind of stuff. That does take it out for me, but the rest of it was really cool. Anyway, so movie's cool. No, the Force is awesome. I've got heaps of medals, and medals I really like. There's just some interesting poses in there, so that's going to be fun. And I've done Germans forever, but these Brits specifically have camo as well, so that's actually interesting for me to paint rather than just a flat color and whatever else.
That's fantastic, and I think you have quite a bit of fun, I think, playing with British, knowing how you play. I think they'll give you a lot of
and especially from our early episode where we're talking about Brits, that really opened my eyes to how much variation there is in their style of play, and that actually really excites me. So I'm going all in with Brits. I've kind of cancelled every other hobby project that I have. I'm out of.
I did notice.
I'm out of all other systems and really, really homing in on Bolt, which is awesome.
For a little while, my Facebook feeds, for example, was just simply you going, "Okay, I'm moving this on. I'm like, what is happening?"
Well, I changed jobs and all this kind of stuff, and I just want to focus on the hobby that I love the most. It's going to be all Bolt for me. But just on that, there is some cool things I've got aside here. So these are some terrain pieces from Dark Castle. So that's a new MDF terrain company out of Sydney. So Callum sent these, and this pack of terrain ruins I've got here is $35. It's so cheap. It's really hard to argue with his pricing, and just about every other day there's something else that's just come out in his line. The problem is it's so cheap that you want to buy every single piece that he has, which seems to be what's happening with a couple of the players here in Perth. But to give you a representation, like this terrain piece here, I mean, here's a little truck that I've got for just for scale. So the pieces are huge, and all it was wood glue and just put it together in the way that's meant to be, and it was ready to go. So I'm actually really happy with that stuff. But
You must be close to almost having a table's worth of terrain now, right?
I do actually for buildings.
Yeah.
The next thing I need to figure out is any kind of foliage and that kind of stuff. I need a nice way that I can produce a table of trees that doesn't cost an arm and a leg.
I was going to say, I should let you borrow the Terrain Tutors Terrain Essentials book, because that has a stack of information in that.
And the other thing I want to do, I'm going to play around with it. Normally, you put trees on its own basing and its own little piece of scenery, and that would be dense terrain and bolt action and that kind of stuff. But I might play around with just giving it like a metallic base, so I can just put just as many trees as I want in that specific spot and take pieces away and that sort of stuff. And then I got a game map.
Hey!
So. Andy from the Warriors Den in Queensland, he sent me this, and this is a Geek Villain gaming mat. It's a 6x4. I was a really huge fan of the cigar box battle mats that we got for the club at different points in time. I like this style of cloth mat over the neoprene. It is slightly oversized 6x4, so the idea is that you just put some crummy foam hills underneath, and then you've got modulation on the board right there. But yeah, there's just something about that texture and stuff that I really enjoy. But yeah, I mean, it's got vegetation on it, it's got roads, it's got a river. It suits what would be perfect for bolts.
And it does. I was going to say, and it does exactly what it needs to, right? Which is when you throw it over the table, over a bit of polystyrene foam or something like that.
Yep.
And, straight away you've got detail on your map. You've got a little bit of, the undulation, like you said. You've got things to play on and around. That's very, very cool.
Yeah, so that's cool. Normally we do these magnificent boards, but storage can always be a bit of a pain with that sort of stuff, and also transporting them to events. So I just wanted something I can just throw in the car at any given time and have a game of Bolt. So I think
color me jealous.
I think we talked everything, Hobby. Oh, sorry. One more thing.
One more.
Yeah, because nobody probably even knows what these are. Yeah. So Mike Lambo, he's an Amazon indie author, and he produces these kind of wargame books that are meant for solitaire. What interests me is typically hex and shit war games are very expensive in Australia, specifically for shipping. So things made by GMT or whatever else, any war game that comes from the US specifically can cost an additional $50, $60 in shipping for a box that's not that much bigger than Advanced Squad Leader. So I've never been able to justify in my head that it makes sense to buy that stuff. But these, they're print on demand, which means Amazon prints them in Sydney or wherever you are in the world. Shipping with Amazon is free if you have Prime. So it's $25 and they print it on demand. You get it in 2 or 3 days.
It's pretty good.
And he's got a whole series. So this one's his latest one. It's Hostage Rescue, and this is kind of like a Counter-Strike that you play with chits and all that kind of stuff. But so he's got Fields of Normandy, Battles of Normandy, Beaches of the Brave, which is D-Day, Race of Bastogne, that's Ardennes. So he's got a lot of World War II solitaire games. I've tried about 5 missions of this. I actually really like the style, and it's inspiring me for the idea of ever kind of producing my own kind of game and being able to release it on Amazon. You don't actually need a publishing agency or anything like that. You basically upload a PDF and they scour it. They make sure that you're not putting on anything illegal, and then it's published. And that's it. So it's really interesting to see how that's put together. So that I'll probably collect more of his stuff soon, and I'm on the hunt for anything else that's similar. There's a lot of pencil RPG books that people have produced, but war games it doesn't seem to be something that's been super popular, other than kind of print and play stuff that you might find on Board Game Geek, War Games Vault, that kind of place. Yeah. But it's hard to know what is good. But Mike Lambo is good.
Yeah, and owning only a couple, but only a couple of the GMT games in my collection. And like I bought the Men of Iron Tri-Pack series, and yeah, that was, to get that shipped across was considerable. But you know, in the grand scheme of things, it's relative. But well, I think that's probably a good summary of where we've been. And the other two guys, well, they're not here, so it doesn't matter. No, it doesn't. They do it on GNT. It's fine. Yeah. We're still you know, they episodes behind.
They buy miniatures, they paint them. You know, yeah. I think you're caught up with that.
They do the standard thing.
Sometimes they play bolt action. Speaking of, we should be talking about bolts.
So, the topic of board control. So as always, when we do these sorts of talks and wanting to give ideas on practically how you can apply it within game and things like that, if we miss something, or if we don't cover something, or if we cover something you don't think is necessarily that effective or important, that's fine. These are just our interpretations of what we think on all of these different topics. But we think board control is obviously not limited to bolt action. It's available. It's really across multiple different wargame systems, and has been for a very, very long time. Hex and counter games, for example, as we were just talking about, they actually use normally a zone of control system where you have a free movement up until the point where your enemy is essentially directly 1 square away or 2 squares away, which then you suddenly are restricted in what you can do. That's a form of board control. But we're going to relate to what it looks like in bolt action, how you can apply it, things to be aware of when you do it, things to be aware of if you're having it done against you. And we'll just try and talk through some of those things with examples where we can, so that we can equip you guys to use the knowledge rather than just, oh, it's great theory, it's just sitting here, can't do anything with it. We want to try and do something a bit more than that. So when we talk about board control, predominantly board control is your ability to influence, counter, or impact what's happening on the board through any various means. That's going to give you some form of advantage in the area of play. And I say the area of play because it's not just the board, it's also how you build your lists, it's also how you engage with what your opponent is doing in their strategies. It's also how you match up your units against your opponent, and those things can happen before you even get onto the board, when you're sharing lists and things like that. And really, if you were able to say that you've done board control 100% successfully, it's because you've locked your opponent out of it. So you've actually taken away all of your opponent's ability to impact the board, and you control that whole board. That's very easy to say. That's very, very hard to do, because you generally play a 2-player game, and your opponent is trying just as hard to control the board themselves. Almost a bit like a chess game. Not quite.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it is a turn-based game. I mean, sure, the activation system isn't to your favor to being able to decide what you can and can't do and how you can dictate the flow at every given point. There's ways to manipulate that, of course, with your list and Snap 2 and whatever else. But yeah, I mean, this is probably my perfect for this call between us. My greatest falling in bolt action at this point in time. I've grown as a player since we've started this podcast. I think that I'm much better at designing lists now, and I'm more comfortable with, I guess, the engagements and deciding what's important. But yeah, I mean, board control is something that I aspire to have, but it's not something that I've been able to necessarily define. It's tough because I guess any kind of decision making that you have, it can't be static. It's going to have to change with your next opponent, next terrain piece, next bit of if their army list is slightly different than you faced them last time, they're learning from you, you're learning from them. You're never going to have a formula that has everything, but it's about capitalizing on what's important. And if you can't, what I've found is I've tried to be everywhere for a long time in this game, and that basically means that I'm deploying to the point where I am scattered across the board to be able to anticipate a threat anywhere, but not be able to capitalize on a large threat in one place at any given time. And I've been really trying to come up with a way to mentally figure out what's going to work for me in general. It's quite tough. I've gone to the extremes in my recent games of really trying to do the Death Star style of play, which is an old 40k term where you're basically boxing all your troops together, which is ideal for the fact that you can have maximum firepower on a particular unit in a particular sector. But it leaves you weak across the board everywhere else. And it actually can be countered quite well in bolt action. There's a number of things that just doesn't work, and that's, you've got to be an inch away from your own units to be able to shoot. And there's a lot of templates that can go through and really make that a bad day. It's easily countered with an airstrike, an artillery piece, a nebel, all this kind of stuff. So it's really hard to do. But I find that when I analyze games that have not gone in my favor, it has been because of not to the extent of Warhammer Death Star, but it's been because somebody can capitalize with 2 or 3 units that can break a flank that is lightly defended by 1 or 2, because I've initially deployed my whole force scattered across the board to, anticipate anything anywhere. So deciding on how much to sort of commit to a certain front or whatever else is really where I'm at, of trying to discover board control. And obviously this is different per mission, per opponent, terrain, all that kind of stuff. But let's get some general concepts out of the way and see where we can improve on that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so I think that's a really good baseline to understand where a lot of people probably, when they're starting to play bolt action and they're not necessarily, they're maybe not even wanting to think this deeply about how they play the game. They're just playing the game. Perfectly fine. But for those who, I always remember Brad at one of the tournaments that we held, and, I made some comment about going, you really should plan to do this or that and whatever. And he turned and he looked at me and he's like, does it look like I'm someone that has a plan? he just was running things forward. And, that's generally how he enjoys just to play, is like he enjoys the hobby and the craft element of it, meticulously and really does fantastic jobs there. But he doesn't stress about being the best player necessarily on the day. He's there to have fun and roll dice. But when you are looking to start assessing parts of the game a bit differently and understanding what you are doing and how things are actually running, typically, Jacob, everyone's in a similar spot to you, where they're so used to going, right, well, I need to watch out for the flamethrowers, I need to watch out for that, I can't bunch up because the multiple rocket launchers are going to cause me a bad day. They're bringing a MG Brin carrier spam, so I know that I'm going to get hit by 2 or 3 pins every turn on each unit along that line. So maybe I do want to bunch up a little bit so I can force, some different things. So there's a lot of the key part of that is there's a lot of reaction that you're building into that mindset, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but it means that when you're talking about wanting to gain some sort of board control, you're already doing it from a reactionary standpoint. And you can do a counterpunch effectively in bolt action and basically take a hit and then hit back harder. The mechanics typically will allow that if you set it up right. But generally, if you're at a point of and what you're describing as being overextended, where you tried to spread your strength across the entirety of your line, but then you can't bring any of that strength necessarily to support an overwhelming odds. You might be able to equal those odds, but you actually can't exploit beyond the stalemate. You just hold it up. For a defensive mission, that's okay. Like if you're playing point defense, for example, all you actually want to do is kind of hold your opponent at bay and limit the number of victory points they're going to be able to get. But for something like sectors, just sort of sitting and especially when they can come on from almost any board edge. That's not what you want to be doing. You don't want to be so stretched out that your units can't support each other in what turns into a crazy melee in most of those circumstances. So, we've talked a little bit about some of that baseline concept. So let's talk about, what does board control look like? So when we're playing a game, when we're setting up with our army lists, what are those things that can actually create board control, create that influence, the ability to counter an opponent's move? And the first one, which you rightly mentioned up front, typically is deployment. And so, we did a whole episode on the different ways to deploy. This is like the next layer of understanding that deployment mechanic, which is when you're deploying either your fixed assets or your big groups of infantry, or even just multiple infantry in support of one another. And when I say support, I'm talking like within 6 to 8 inches of one another, so they are very close. And the reason that you want to keep them that close is that 6 to 8 inches, first of all, you can cover it largely with an advance, or you can definitely cover that distance in a run. So if that squad needs help, you can quickly redeploy the second squad to go and assist.
That's a really good way to look at it. That really negates that whole, I'm going to run one turn to then get closer to my threatened unit for the second turn. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
I've made plenty of mistakes in my games of bolt action over the many years that I've been playing now, and many since it came out, that is. But one of the biggest ones that I had to learn was that it's not like 40k, and your infantry units actually don't have the ability just to sit and absorb damage. They're not Space Marines, they are infantrymen. And depending on what quality of infantrymen you've taken, they're really bad infantrymen, or they're really good infantrymen. But I learned with regulars for bolt action, and so I really had to understand a little bit more of the finesse element, because I was constantly facing veterans, and so I had manpower, but I was generally outgunned, and so I had to use that manpower to support, I guess, on more central objective or spots on the board that I wanted to choose to control and contest. Where you were saying, for example, that because the other part of deployment is objectives, where those objectives sit, where you choose to put your units in relation to those objectives. Depending on how many infantry units that are in your list and why and where you have designed your list to sit, I typically try to commit, if it's 3 objectives in the game or an odd number of objectives, I only pick half that I want to fight for. I look at the terrain and the best approaches through that terrain that my units could take, and how much space would be around those units if they were getting hit by enemy fire. So how protected would they be? I choose the half of the board or the objectives that suit me. Typically, you want to, again, because you're wanting to control the board, you don't want to take an objective on the left flank and an objective on the right flank. You probably want to tidy up a middle one plus one of the others, again, depending on mission. But I had to learn the hard way that one unit just going to sit on an objective, that doesn't cut it, because it only takes one lucky mortar shell, and half the unit disappears in most circumstances.
Yeah, that's right.
And then the unit just goes, I don't want to play anymore. They just disappear. So knowing where your objectives are going to go, and generally I try to put at least 2 infantry units, with the sole purpose of they're going to go and control the board in that space. So even if I can't hold it, I deny that to my opponent. But I really want to be pushing to try to control it. So then, sorry, I stalled for a second.
You're all good.
So then there's also, what other forms then can it take? Well, there is actually quite a few. So we've talked briefly about list building already. And so your list building and how you're going to impact your board control, there are some things that you can know before you even get to a table, before you even get to an opponent, there are some things, units or particular builds that you can have board control. So, and sometimes those are specific units, like a multiple rocket launcher is a good example. Typically, that will give you board control because it will encourage your opponent to spread out. That means that you can use your superior firepower or simply number of models to exploit a weakness in their line. But it's also things like you could build your list to say, I definitely am going to have a truck full of SMG Soviets in outflank. And so I'm going to be able to influence the board because they will be in outflank whenever the missions allow. Same as the Finnish Kaukovaltio, which rock up on the back edge. You will always get some form of board control on the back edge using Finns if you run that specialist unit, because that's exactly what they do. But it goes a step further as well, because you can turn it around and go, okay, so I know what is in my list and my force, and I'm using a theatre selector, like the 150th Panzer Battalion, I think it is, which is they're basically all dressed up in American uniforms, and they go in and they can't be targeted. Army can't be targeted, or not targeted until their conditions are met.
They're within a certain distance of
which is like 12 inches submachine gun range. It's pretty scary.
And I'm pretty sure they've also got a unit that prevents the opponent from outflanking as well. It's a little bit more expensive, but you're paying points for board control.
Yes, you are. And board control in probably one of the truest forms, where you literally are just going, you can't touch me. Like, you literally can't touch me. And that can be very challenging to play against. I think I've played against it once in my career of casual games and lineup and things like that, and it was sort of a half joke, sort of a let's do it. And once you understood how to fight it, it wasn't so bad. But I tell you what, going in with fresh eyes of like, I've just seen this play and I'll give it a crack. I had no control in that game. I had no idea what was going on. Another example would be when you take a large percentage of, or a complete army of cavalry, be it Polish lancers or Manchurian riders, or in fact really any cavalry that can charge into close combat. Your board control with those is going to be quite sufficient. Not only do the cavalry move really fast, but they charge at that fast rate of 18. And so, you bring one unit on and the next turn it can charge 18. That means if you ran the unit the first time, you've covered 36 inches of the board. There's only 12 inches left, from back edge to back edge. Like that's significant.
And you really
control
need
of the board doesn't mean winning the game. Those are different things. But they do generally go hand in hand. If you can control the board and influence and impact, you are stacking your advantages to win.
No, that's really interesting. I mean, fast moving units is definitely something to consider, and then really, I guess, pre-planning what is this going to do within turn one of fast moving on the board to somewhere safe, and then to turn two, where is it going to go after that? I mean, this whole time I've been thinking in my head that I am very comfortable playing veterans. It gives me quite a confidence to be able to particularly win one-on-one fights, and that it's something that I don't really need to worry about, and it seems to work in my favor a lot. But you were mentioning earlier how you have learnt the game playing regs. And that regs give you that extra one or two squads, and you need to utilize those to overcome vets. You naturally have more board control because you have more units, you have more positioning, you have more ability to apply pins, maybe not casualties, but that also creates essence of where things need to be. You can really put a threatening place on the board regardless of killing the unit.
Yes.
And that's a really interesting approach, and I'm gonna steal it. I need to do it. I think
it's
fine. And because how I play the game, I'm naturally outnumbered at any given point in time, and it means that I need to succeed parts of the boards to actually do anything meaningful. But it always means that there are opportunities that are missed. And that's really interesting. We're really going into the list building here about board control, but it's essential to doing it right in a way.
Yeah, it is. And I think it's important to understand that a lot of these things that we're talking about and some of the practical examples that we're trying to point to, they all go hand in hand. So if you know what your list is going to be able to do, and you know what the objectives are, and you deploy to try and take advantage of those objectives, and you support your squads as best as you possibly can for those objectives, that's already 4 things, right, that we've ticked off. But that has put you in a better position to use and influence the board where those units are deployed than simply not having a plan, just throwing a list together, deploying in a spread, defensive line, and then not actually knowing what objectives you want to go for. They're very different positions. But it's even and you talked about it a little bit then, veterans typically are going to outgun a regular unit in a one-on-one fight. So your composition of your units when you're thinking about board control, when you go past deployment and you're now in the game, it still harkens back to your list building, but in the game. What weapons do they have? Are you running combined squads that have multiple different weapon loadouts? Are you running just rifles? Are you running squads where they are only using one weapon type? Not all nations necessarily have the same access to all those different options. Soviets, for example, they can pretty much choose whatever they want and then get a unit worth of it. Germany is pretty much on the same
pretty
place.
close.
Yeah. American Britain, not so much. Britain has a few that they can still do that with. America struggles to really get a lot of focused units that are just on that one weapon system. America gets other benefits though.
That's one thing that really goes in my favor, and that's that I really kit out my squads with the benefit of being German, that they will have anti-tank capability, that they will have rapid firepower with a lot of ARs and whatever else, that it gives me confidence that they're like a tool that can fit any job. But you are paying to do that. But it's like, look, even my infantry have an anti-tank threat. So it allows me to be a threat anywhere on the board to anything that it's going to face.
And that actually, what you're talking about there, and the way that you're framing up is, my unit can be a threat to any type of opposing unit. That is board control by its weapon loadout. So you know that you're gonna. It doesn't matter whether it's an armored car or a tank or an infantry unit or a team or, heaven forbid, the poor medic. It doesn't matter. You're going to be able to engage with that target. That's board control. Now, because it's driven by the weapon at that point, your board control changes from simply being a vague sort of space that you're going to occupy when you send the unit in. It now starts putting measurements on what that board control looks like. You have, the range of your rifles, you have the range of your SMGs, you have the range of your assault rifles and the Panzerfaust, etc., whatever weapon, if you've got a light mortar in the team. If you have, if it's a medium machine gun team, you've obviously got its weapons range and its arc of fire. So then you can start thinking about the board being zoned by those different weapon bands. Infantry units, it's quite simple because it's just a circle, and so it's just a footprint of the different weapon ranges. And the other thing to be aware of is as those ranges get further away from your unit, if you think about them in a color gradient of traffic lights, being the center of those circles is red, the outside is yellow, and the outside is green, the inside is yellow. Or swap those colors around if you want, whichever makes more sense to you. your areas that are closer, be it generally in the 6-inch bubble range, that's going to be your most effective shooting available, because you've got point blank. You generally aren't going to have to move. You generally can. You may not be able to ignore cover, but you're technically bumping that cover down to soft cover at the worst because of that point blank bonus.
Yep.
And so that's your most effective shooting ranges. When you start obviously going further out, that starts changing. You're firing less shots, you're firing less weapons when you get out to the real rims. And that's where you start entering the wonderful territory that is 7s to hit.
Yeah.
Now you can, a pin is a pin. And pins are their own form of board control, which we'll get to in a second. So 7s to hit is not, it's not that your board control is 0. It's just not as impactful as 6s or 4s or 3s. So that all plays its different part. I think one of the biggest forms of board control that is most applicable across any force, and by sheer mechanic of the rules, where you don't even have to think too much about it, is pins. The placement of pins on units and effects that generate pins. It is the most obvious form of board control that you generally can provide, because it simply can stop your opponent doing something when they fail that order check. As my inexperienced shirkers are probably going to do at Southern Thrust. The big thing, though, if you want to, so pin management is essentially that first foundational layer. That second layer of what the board control piece looks like is when you start going, I have this weapon system or these squads available. I know that unit over there, they are veterans, so I'm unlikely to kill them, but I need to do whatever I can to try and stop them or make them ineffective. Well, if all 3 of these units that are in range go and take those shots just to generate the pin on the veteran unit, if they all hit, that's 3 pins. Even if I don't kill anything, the veterans are now on 7s. Yeah, they're just, the veterans are like, well, we might be able to still move forward, but we're going to be ineffectual.
Yep. And
that is what you want. Because that's board control. You've impacted and influenced your opponent's units, and you've locked them out. It doesn't matter if it's only for the one turn. And that's the other thing about board control. So I was going to get into this as we roll forward, but this is a pretty good segue, so I'll just keep going. But
power on.
Yeah. Board control is only ever temporary. Now so if you only think about board control for a single turn, and the reason that I would say that is because at the end of every turn, obviously the dice reset. And that means that nobody has any control until those dice start coming out again. Now, you can string multiple turns together in one area of the battlefield, and potentially your unit that was just sitting on ambush, you're happy just to keep on ambush. That will still be board control and control that area. You're trying to lock down a spot that the opponent potentially would come charging or moving through. But the reason that I would say that it's only temporary is because if your opponent, for example, does have something in outflank and decides to bring that on, that changes the shift of everything very, very quickly. So you can feel like you have board control at the end of a turn because all the pieces were on the border moving, and you felt like you had the upper hand. You felt like you generated enough pins. You felt like you were putting pressure where it needed to go. But when that turn changes over, there's no guarantees that you're getting that first dice, and there's no guarantees that any reserves or outflankers that your opponent has were going to stay there. Like they could come onto the board, and all of a sudden your board control equation flips, and suddenly they're in control because they just obliterated your unit with a flamethrower. And it's also the same when you have, for example, a jeep and a flamethrower. Classic combination, same as a jeep and a bazooka, or the equivalent in all the other nations. They'll typically hide behind a building, out of sight, can't be shot. When the target makes itself available, they zip out the turn before. Now, technically, on the turn before, when they do the zipping out, they are vulnerable, but nothing else is really left to move, and so they're safe. But that only lasts for about a turn because they're about to get shot up if they don't get the dice out. You've seen it before, right?
Oh, well, if you require that next pull, you're not going to get it.
Yeah, you got to have that.
Don't
chaplain
bank
on
your
standby,
entire
right?
strategy
Yeah.
on it, I guess, is the key point there. No, yeah, I can think of a million games where it's not gone in my favor.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
And sometimes, and so can I, just for the
Yeah.
record.
Of course.
The where it comes into its own, I guess, is how do you tie that level of board control or that threat? Because when you are the one applying the board control, you are the threat.
Yep.
When you are on the receiving end of board control, you have to use your threat assessment to dismantle the situation and actually unpick your opponent's plan. But when you are the threat and you have a Jeep with a bazooka that's going to be within point blank on a Tiger in the rear, let's make it really bad, with no cover. When you're in that place where you are actually going to be the threat and you are going to be able to execute, let's say that you've got an extra couple of dice in the bag, so the odds probably are going to be in your favor, but the Tiger's already activated, so there's no threat from the Tiger killing you that turn. You have the board control to go in and take that Tiger out whenever you want. You don't have to wait. You don't have to do it immediately. But you can wait. You don't have to wait if you decided that's where you want to get your kill for the turn, or if you had to get rid of it to block line of sight for something else. That's all fine. But recognizing that whilst the board control is temporary, there's also a timing element to it. It's not simply just you automatically have board control. You need to be able to play it right at the right time. And that's where even at the start of this episode, when you were talking about it changes for every opponent, it changes for every battle and every mission and every terrain setup. And it's true. And so to really get the most out of board control, it does take you got to do that intentional practice that Gorchin talks about of this is the focus, this is what I'm here to do, and I need to try as best as I can to reach that outcome. But I mean, if I think about some of the units that I use for board control more specifically, so I love using one of my favorite combinations is, and it takes 3 dice to do it, so it's not an efficient combination, but it is fun. It's a truck filled with a unit of 10 guys, be it close combat assault rifles or submachine guns, with a flamer team in the same truck. And so it's a 3 dice move, which generally is turn 1, they'll move up to be safe. Turn 2, they'll probably get into position to drop out. If I'm lucky, I'll get them to be able to be dropped out to be useful in turn 3. But generally turn 3 is when they get out and then start hunting their objective down. But it's really, really, if you're waiting till turn 3, just put them in outflank.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah,
because then you can
it's the same thing.
And you can generally just bring them on. They're safe. They've got up the field the whole way.
Yeah.
And you can suddenly put with 10, even with 10 rifles and a flamethrower team, even if you didn't take the assault rifles or submachine guns on your unit of choice. Yep. Just a flamethrower team and 10 rifles suddenly appearing on a flank can actually be a real big problem. You need to pick your moment, and you need to be aware of what else is on the board around them, because it's very easy to commit something and then realize that you made a mistake and you've just got those 2 units killed for no benefit whatsoever. Typically, I learned that lesson when trying to outflank veterans, thinking they were in cover, of course, and I thought, I'm like, I've got this. It's fine. Yep. They're all just gonna whatever. It's fine. And then the attack basically bounced. I think I killed maybe 1, and they turned around and went, "And you're not in cover, and you're only regular," and they just gunned me down. I was like, I won't do that again. That was dumb. So that was an instance where I thought I had board control, but I actually didn't, because I hadn't set myself up in a position to get the board control. I just sort of went in all guns blazing, going, "Yeah, she'll be right, mate. It'll be fine." Yeah. And it wasn't.
But those aggressive plays are definitely a way to retake the initiative that has been lost. And with those units not being on the board for a few turns, you're probably on the back foot in some way. But the idea of outflank is your opponent can't anticipate where it's coming from, and even if they have a good idea of which side it might be more beneficial, and you may have thought that in your head when you were doing the deployment, they won't know exactly where. So they can't. And if they commit resources for anticipating it, that means you can make the advantage elsewhere.
Yeah, generally.
Yeah.
So, and the simple reality is if you know that your reinforcements are coming in on the left, and let's say that your opponent has appropriately deducted that they are coming on that side, so they divert a chunk of their resources in preparation, that's less of their army on the board to deal with your army that is on the board. So, that's actually a fantastic opportunity to look at your units and the board, look at the fire lanes that your units can have or that your fixed weapons can have, and think about where can I set these units up so that they have control over that space. One of the things that we haven't talked about just yet in terms of what board control can be used for is actually in victory point denial. And sometimes that is simply being aware, if you're playing a kill point mission, being acutely aware of how powerful your opponent's guns are and where they are pointing so that you don't put anything in a kill box. But most of the time it's talking about if you want to protect an objective, there are very few things that I am probably more scared of in bolt action than having to go claim an objective that's guarded by a flamethrower team that is currently out of sight and on ambush. That is pretty terrifying. Generally, I've seen it where they'll be sitting behind the edge of a house. The objective is literally 1 inch from that house, and they are just sitting on ambush. And it's like, if I go anywhere near that objective in order to claim it, I have to be within the 6-inch range of the flamethrower, and I will be visible, and the flamethrower is going to take the shot, and I can scream for cover as much as I want. It's a flamethrower, and it doesn't care. And so I'm gonna get hit on a 3, maybe on the 4 if I don't cross over that threshold of the half range for the flamer. But that the whole problem is that the whole conundrum is that that's me going in to get the objective, and if it's only my 1 unit, and let's say that I somehow survive that first flamer, I've done my activation for the turn, so unless they run out of fuel, I'm then sitting point blank for another shot as soon as he activates the next turn, and you can guarantee if his dice comes out first, he's going to set me on fire again. And that is the part that makes it scary. I just put it in quotes because I'm not scared technically, but
yes, a very efficient defensive option for locking down an objective piece. A regular one for 50 points, and you just go, we're playing demolition? Okay, fantastic. Come and get my flamer. I don't care. I'm like, it's quite useful. I think so. That's objective denial is how I see that as board control, because you're essentially saying, I don't want you coming anywhere near this, and if you do, I'm going to give you a really bad day. And again, because it's only 50 points, the rest of your army goes off and does what it needs to do. If you are playing demolition, it means they can more aggressively hunt your opponent. You're all ready to go for your outflank maneuver if you need. And then the other big one for or victory point denial or area denial for board control in particular is obviously your fixed weapon teams, your mortars, your heavy howitzers. Multiple rocket launchers fall into this, although there's a bit more that they're associated with as well. As much as people don't necessarily like the way the rules work, technically smoke is a form of board control because you're 100%. Locking down line of sight. It's very hard to make those things accurate. Multi-launchers are a bit better because it's a multiple shot drop, so it's simply more smoke that you're putting down. The smoke barrage is actually quite good. That one's because that doesn't the artillery observer.
Because that one doesn't scatter, and it's a huge chunk of smoke that drops down on the field. But of course, if you're using an artillery observer, I would recommend thinking about how you can use that artillery strike as a area denial weapon that you can then
definitely.
stop. Yeah, you can either force people to run away from it, which is typical. Sorry, my nose has been ridiculously
That's
itchy.
all right.
You can either use it as a area denial weapon that forces your opponent to move, or if you know that they have stuff in outflank or reserve and you think you know where it's going to be coming on, just put the marker in front of that and put it sort of 6 to 8 inches back. When they come on from reserve, if they are anywhere near that marker, they're immediately basically going to come onto the board and then get pinned, providing your marker obviously brings it in. But I have used that successfully against multiple people where they deliberately refused their flank, and so they put everything on the left and the center, for example, left the right completely free. And I went, okay, they've got some stuff in outflank. It's either going to be deliberately on their left so they can really strongly hold that side of the board, probable, or they could be doing it on the right where the objective is, and because they've got a truck with a bunch of troops in it, so they might be wanting just to sneak onto that objective at the end. And so what I did was essentially the majority of my force went to my right, which was their left, to counter what I thought, correctly assumed actually, that's where their push was going to come from. But I was wrong about the other objective. That's where the truck and the troops were. So what I had done as a backup for myself was I used the artillery strike to put an artillery strike over on the objective and just left that there for the game until it came in. And that held him off far enough away where he was like, I can't really afford to take the risk that I'm not going to get the objective. And so I essentially controlled that entire portion of the board simply by putting an artillery strike marker, which then delayed for 2 turns.
Oh, gee.
Now, we were both disappointed it was delayed because he wanted on the objective and I wanted it just to come in already. But the actual effect of that was that he didn't want to go anywhere near it, and so no one was holding that objective. In some missions, if you are having cumulative scoring where it's round on round, you add up where you're going or something like that, that's actually a very viable way of managing the board.
I really like the idea of not committing that air and artillery strike in turn 1. I think it's a wasted option to put it in their front line, and they're going to have a turn of rallies or even just regular moves that are just going to clear off that pin. It doesn't really make an impact, and particularly with artillery, it's not necessarily going to convert into many kills or anything like that. Not wiping out a unit, that's for sure. That's a really nice idea for dictating the other side of the board that you might not be able to commit forces to. Same with the idea of the flamethrower, and I guess one thing that we could capitalize on taking the initiative on taking a sector that you don't have under your control is probably really getting a good grasp of what you could do with a very nice order dice pool of a snap 2.
Yes.
Yeah. And that's yes, we talked about that. Board control is something that I need to think about a lot more. But snap 2 is something that I've completely avoided in this game, because I did the very early thing where you snap to every opportunity that you can, and then you're out of dice, and things didn't really happen the way that you wanted to. So then I've avoided it ever since, until the perfect opportunity is there, which is never. And my officers specifically are there to help with pins, more than anything else. But yeah, I guess good players capitalize on a successful push that relates to several squads moving at the same time at the right time together.
And that part is probably the most critical. It's trying to activate multiple squads at once, which is typical. Obviously, that's what Snap 2's entire function is. But it's the right squads at the right time and for the right reason. And that is a lot harder to get right. So, and when I say get right, I simply mean, as you say, to get the value out of a push, to get the value out of moving those units up the field. So typically, I use Snap 2 a lot, probably more than what I should, because I look at Snap 2 is also, it's one of the few types of orders that you can issue where you can affect multiple units at once. The other one is typically multiple rocket launchers, simply by the number of units you could possibly hit, and activation of a vehicle that has multiple gun mounts and therefore can shoot at multiple units. They're probably the two big standouts that sort of pop in my mind. Most other interactions is one unit against one unit, generally. So Snap 2 gives you that space where if someone has just come on from outflank and you weren't expecting it, but you've got an officer there and two squads, for example, you can go, right, well, instead of just moving the one squad here, I'm going to move the officer and this squad. I'm going to move the officer to where he's safe, and I'm going to move the other squad to a defensive position. This way, I'm increasing my board control because I'm moving into cover or a better cover. I can also get some opening shots on the opponent before they disengage their troops. If it costs me one of my two squads, that's unfortunate, but that's just also how the game goes. If you've obviously got the first level lieutenant, because that was a second level lieutenant example. If you've got your first level lieutenant, just move both. Because you've got that ability to, right? So I find there is a very steep learning curve with a Snap 2 as to whether or not you push too early or just miss the timing of the push. And I'm not entirely convinced that I have it down pat in any sort of black art science or anything like that. But I generally have found that as I've used it more specifically with a first lieutenant and two squads, or even sometimes a squad and a special weapon team, I've used it quite a bit with my I'm trying to think if they are my anti-tank rifle teams and one of my squads of infantry for Soviets. Typically because I would have multiple anti-tank rifle teams, so I can afford to pull one off into this side R. And his whole objective and the squad that's with him is the anti-tank rifle will open up first and attempt simply to get a conversion of a pin and possibly a kill. If he hits, bearing in mind that he shoots sort of 30 inches, if he gets the hit off, then it actually doesn't matter what the infantry squad do, because they're not there necessarily to automatically generate the pin or the hit. They're there as bodies to exhibit that board control on the space. If I lead it the other way, and let's say that I open up with the unit of infantry, they've got the shorter range. They're typically going to be 6s and 7s to hit if they're in cover. Which is not too different to the anti-tank rifle, but I often find the anti-tank rifle, because it's a small team, I can deploy it a little bit further up, get in that minimum range, as opposed to the maximum range, and that helps convert 6s rather than 7s. But the big squad of infantry, I want to be able to move them if I get that pin with the anti-tank rifle. I don't want to start with their shooting and then go, well, the anti-tank rifle is not really good at exerting much control outside of shooting. And I don't particularly, whilst I can move and shoot it, it's not as effective as moving and shooting a block of infantry. And so it's also knowing and learning for your army, which takes a bit of learning anyway. What is the right order to activate those things to make the most use in your board control? Because a unit of sort of 10 infantry that might suddenly need to go, the anti-tank rifle got a hit. We're going to run towards the objective now instead of take the advance, because we know that they're going to have to pass that order test. Maybe they've already had a number of pins on them already. Maybe because of that one pin, maybe they actually now need a order check, which, irrespective of whether they pass or not, still going to have one pin, which means it's harder to hit me.
Yep. That's a really good way to look at it, because, you know, the automatic decision would be move the big block, see what it can do. It's gonna convert the most damage. But yeah, I mean, it's something as simple as an anti-tank rifle. Once you do that pin, that squad's no longer the threat that it was, so you can make other decisions based on that.
That's right, and I've heard Gorgon describe it, I think, before as like it's your opportunity tree of choices. Like if what you're trying to do is make as efficient choices that you possibly can that give you the most branches in that tree for the next order dice or for the next action, because the more control that you have over being able to choose which option you take, in theory, the better that makes your game. And I've seen it work in games that I've played where by doing one thing like that, taking an anti-tank rifle shot very quickly, okay, I need 7s to hit, got the 6, okay, you are hit by the anti-tank rifle, sorry in advance, okay, yes, I killed a guy. But because of that pin, that unit has then failed their morale check by 1, and so they went down. And that meant that when I got to my infantry squad, I'm like, there's actually nothing else around us on the table. I can afford to take a run and get around the side of this hill. I can't be targeted by anything for that turn. Next turn, I could advance up onto it, or on the cusp of it and shoot down. I wouldn't have been able to do that if I'd led with the advance and tried to run the anti-tank rifle team over. Like, it's not the same. The survivability of the anti-tank rifle is just not the same. It's good, but it's not great.
Yeah, no, definitely not.
So
yeah, it's an interesting order of operations.
Yeah, and trying to tie the order of those operations into how does that increase or change my board control. Now, up until this point in the podcast, we've only actually talked about board control in your favor.
Yep.
We've only talked about it as if you're the one that's in control of that space. Now, I certainly have had happen, and you probably have had too, where you're playing a game and you suddenly look at the table and you go, I don't have, like, it's not that you don't have units, but you're looking at your choices of how you want to try and engage, and you go, there's actually not that much that I realistically think I can do to change the status quo here, because, okay, he's got 2 units over there and I've got 1. Well, simply on dice, that's not going to work out in my favor. So can I do anything to support that unit? No. Well, do I pull that unit back to try and get it consolidated with my force? Okay, I could do that. What happens if I do that? Oh, sacrifice the objective. I don't want to sacrifice the objective. I want to fight to the bitter end.
Yep.
So that sort of thought process is, you know, and I've gone through it untold number of times. Like, I can't even count. But the reality is that's when someone is actually experiencing board control for them, and I'm having to, as I said, I'm now in threat assessment mode. I'm now trying to pick apart their plan. I'm now trying to understand what can I do to get myself back on track. So do you have any experiences like that you can think about or talk about?
Of how to retake the initiative, of how to make the best from a bad situation, that perhaps sticking to your initial plan, that you need to deviate, that you need to come up with something new. This is something that is probably quite hard to put into words and quite hard to give advice on, because if you're in this situation, it's tough. If you've been in this situation many times, it's tough. But yes, I think you've got to get to the point where you're going to have to expect that this will happen eventually. And you need to have some predetermined plans on how to alleviate these issues. And simply going down is not the way to do it in every case. It's great when you need to save a unit, but then what is that unit going to do next turn? You know? And it's we were just talking about redeploying right there, and that seems to have been my ticket to making a terrible situation not so bad. And that is negating it. It's sure your unit isn't effective. It's moving backwards. It's probably repositioning to the stronger part of your force. That's better than it going down. That's better than it advancing forward unsupported. Maybe putting a pin on one unit, but what about the next one behind the wall or whatever else? Yeah, and all these little tricks we've been talking about throughout this whole episode have really opened my eyes to other ways that you can overcome a situation where you're outnumbered. And that's typically what I'm thinking of here. And it's what I've wanted to ask you this whole time. What do you do when you're in that terrible situation? What do you do next?
And that's why I thought we would start with you first, because yes, I have some advice probably for those that are stuck in those spots. The first thing, as you rightly point out, accept that this is a game, and very much importantly that it's a dice game, and the best laid plans of mice and men are naught compared to first contact with the enemy. Now that's a mismatch of a whole bunch of different phrases, but it's still true. Probably the big thing, I have a mental checklist that I go through when I'm in that situation. And generally I'm in that situation because I tried to gamble with something and it didn't work. I thought it was probably going to be okay, and something else happened and I went, oh, that was not a good idea. Outflank has caught me a couple of times with things like that, where I'm like, I totally forgot that you had that there and I moved them into the open. That was dumb. The first thing that I look at in my checklist is, what's the mission? So what is the objective of the mission? And the only reason that I start there is if I am on an objective or can get to an objective reasonably within a turn without being wiped out, there is merit to staying there, going down and fighting on. Most of the time, as you say, going down just to try and save the squad is not the right move. If the objective is not something that's in play.
And typically, I've looked at that for a long time as I can hold down multiple units with a down figure and draw fire and have the opportunity to do things elsewhere. It's never going to work that way. No one's going to commit multiple units to a down figure that's going to be harder to hit. And they'll see right through it.
Yeah, it will work if they're on an objective occasionally. And it depends on how determined the opponent is to get to that objective. So if you remember back to when we played the massive Fortress Budapest game, I had a unit of Bulgarians that sat on one of the objectives just in a castle. Now, that I am sure that they were hugging each other in a circle with blankets over their heads. Just there were so many bullets coming into that building to get them. And they were almost completely pinned out. But because they were on an objective, the right thing for me to do was just to say, hold. I'm really sorry, guys. You're going to have to go down again and just hug that wall just that little bit tighter. And in the end, they survived all sorts of things they had no right to be surviving, if I'm brutally honest. But it was the right call for that. But in most other situations, I would have pulled that unit out of the building, and I would have gone, okay, I need to. Even sometimes with the objective, like I was outnumbered sort of 6-1 in that scenario. And I was like, I really need to pull that unit back. And in most cases I probably would have, because as you say, redeploying backwards to gain more support from your main force really is my second checkpoint. So if the objective stuff is not in play, how do I pull back to get the unit support? Because what that does is put the fight back to a closer footing. And sometimes the closer unit doesn't necessarily have to be a really powerful one. 12 inexperienced Soviet rifles is by far one of the most MVP awarded units that I've ever had in my armies. Because when I rely, like people go, oh, but they're inexperienced. I'm like, yeah, but it's still 12 rifle shots. Like the strength of the rifle doesn't go down. So I'm still throwing a decent number of dice. If it was a 5-man squad, you're right. I probably would be overbaking this. But it's 12 rifles. And
not to be underestimated, that squad. It always does work.
And they're well known for that. Like, and they get under a few people's skin for exactly that reason. But I love them. They're great. But yeah, the redeployment is quite critical. Obviously, the redeployment actually happens in two directions. There's the unit running away to get to a better position, and there's the unit that you send after it to shorten the length of time that they're unsupported for. You do need to try to get both of those things to happen. And also don't forget that any unit in the game that has a weapon is able to be that support unit. But you need to make sure that the support unit is targeting the right thing. So if a unit has already activated this turn, you don't want the support unit shooting at that. You want to shoot at the stuff that hasn't activated. And if it has already activated, you're looking for the stuff that does not have a pin, so you can force those order checks next turn. And if everything already has a pin, then you're really looking at the most high value target, unless they have deliberately something like a flamethrower in a Pioneer squad or something like that, and you've got a sniper as your support unit, then you kill the flamethrower.
When we're talking about being on the defensive, that you've lost the initiative, that you need to retake, things that come to my mind is that you could really, from a position that is, when you're on the defense, what's a very strong option is ambush, and that can create zones of control immediately. Ambush is best played aggressively to create zones of control that then the opponent is afraid to enter. However, it's fantastic when you're on the defense and you need to reassert dominance to a section. You might not be able to create more ball control outside of that zone, but it is a good way to dictate what the opponent may and may not do next.
Yeah, and that's actually my number 3 checkpoint on that list, is to go, if going down could help me but isn't the primary objective, if I am too far unsupported from my force, so running away isn't really going to help me in the next turn or two, I'm just going to get cut down as I run away, then actually, ambush is the better choice. Because then you turn around and go, if you get shot, you can go down. If someone moves close to you, then you can just wait for the prime, like you can wait for the preferred target and then just open up on them. But it also means that, if you get assaulted, well, you can wait for that super point blank 2+ hits and there's nothing they can do about it. If any sort of artillery range is in on you, you can flick to down. But also at the end of the turn, if something else happens on the field and suddenly those enemy units that were bearing down on you suddenly have to change direction, and often this happens because your opponent is confident that they can wipe that unit out with their unit they've sent. So they'll go, right, well, I only need the one unit now to go over there, and this unit that we're going to peel off and we're going to go over here and do these other things. At that point where they've made it a one-on-one, activate the ambush and shoot them before the end of the turn. But wait till the end of the turn to make sure everything moves away, because what they've done is essentially given you an extra turn that you didn't have before. And if that unit that they've sent to chase you suddenly takes a failed order check because of the pin that you dealt from your ambush, you're suddenly back in the game of actually now that board control has started flipping
and
back
this
in
zone
my
is
favor.
secure.
And you know what? You could probably just put them on ambush again and do the same thing. But they're sort of my three my three go-to methods that I look at, which are, it's either the most efficient way to get victory points because priority number one is always play the mission.
Mm-hmm.
Can I pull back and reinforce? So pull back with one squad, reinforce with another to equal or at least lessen the odds and increase my chances of being effective for the remainder of the game. Maybe I do a counter attack on that objective later on. Or three, put him into ambush as the best, as you say, the best of a bad situation to try to gain some sort of defensive and aggressive buff at the same time. I've also, to sell the unit really cheaply and make it hard for them to deal with. So you give it the ambush order so that you've got teeth to go and shoot at some stuff. But if they come out with some really big guns, you can just dive away into a foxhole and put the roof over it and go down and make that difficult. And that moves into the space of you're actually reversing the board control at that point, right? Just because if you're able to, with the ambush order, you're aiming to actually get your opponent to invest more resources than what they want to do to deal with your one unit. So that still is definitely in that space of turning that board control around.
Yeah, definitely. Doesn't matter if it's not going to be the effective piece that clears the board in that section. If they're having to place more resources to deal with that threat, you've just gained control elsewhere. And there as well, in a sense, if that unit's still standing.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and so, it's... And again, a lot of these things are they're rules of thumb.
Yeah.
And because they are situational. I have stared down the barrel of an 88 multiple times with a unit and just gone, you guys are screwed. And you look at the different options and I'm like, realistically, probably putting myself in ambush is the best option that I've got because I can't get away or I can't do whatever. And then the 88 goes, so you may as well go down because I'm not going to move. I'm just going to shoot at you. And yeah, fair enough. Yeah, okay, yeah. Again, that goes back to the first comment where it's a game and it's a dice game. And so things sometimes are just not going to go your way. But hopefully that's given our listeners a better indication of some of the practical things that you can consider doing.
And definitely a great starting point for things to mentally prepare and consider and realize that it isn't all lost when you're on that side of the table. And I would imagine that a lot of the things that we've been talking about in previous episodes about taking the initiative, about making those plays, just so you know, those aren't going to naturally just happen in the game from playing it. You need to think about it.
Yeah.
And you need to plan it. And especially with the idea of any kind of plays that relate to a Snap 2. I can tell you from experience, they don't just naturally happen. Everybody who plays that way has thought it out and what they're going to do ahead of time. So you're going to need to be able to think about what your list is going to do on this mission, irrespective of who you're facing.
Yeah, so as an example for that, and like I even did it for, I can't show you the picture because it's somewhere in this flip pattern. I don't remember what page it's on, but I actually, for example, for Southern Thrust with my list, and the lists are public, so I'm taking a 20 order dice Soviet list down.
Oh, that's you.
Yeah, that's me. And how I got to that, and everyone goes, oh my goodness, 20 dice, like you're really cheesing it up and spamming units. And I went, look, there is some unit spam in there, I'm not going to lie. But it's actually like the entire list, all 20 dice are inexperienced.
Yep.
3 of the infantry's choices are partisans that are also shirkers. So those shirkers, there's only 5 in each squad, and the squads are going to take double pins, and they have to take an order test every time they go to activate, irrespective of whether they have pins or not. And it's just like, oh, okay, yes, there is some spammy stuff in there, but it ain't scary. Like, like, you got 5 guys for 20 points. and I'll be lucky if I kill 2 guys with them. So, you know,
We're
it's
just praying that they can generate more pins on your opponent than they can on you.
Look, it's which is hard because I'm a 2-for-1 ratio against. But you know, the reason that I want to take the list partly is I'm really starting to experiment a bit more with multiple small unit attack run and using lots of smaller, you know, what is considered less efficient units, and trying to just drive, you know, how effective can the pin management be when I outnumber you sort of 3-1 in terms of dice. Now, there is 2 or 3 lists that I've seen already that if I come up against them to fight at the event, you know, my board control is actually going to be limited simply by what's in the opposing list, because you know the matchup of your lists and how you possibly could fight one another is also an element, like plays into what board control you can possibly have. So I know that there's a German armored platoon that's going to be running around, and I'm looking at my list going, I mean, I've got some anti-tank threats, to be fair, like I do. They die in a stiff breeze, though. And
have the confidence that within 6 turns, there's not enough turns to remove 20 order dice. But yes, I'm really keen to see how the multiple small units work, especially, you know, being on the other side of primarily veteran. 2 or 3 pins on my expensive squad is terrifying.
Yeah, and I'll have to see how it goes. Like I've done a bit of I've done some theory hammer about, you know, for the different missions where I think I need to try and set objectives and set deployments and things like that to get the most out of those particular units and setups. I've looked at within my army composition and the different lists that I'm now going to face. I don't normally see the list that I'll face in advance in a lot of my casual games. We just have typically we know roughly what we're going to bring and we just bring it. So to see all the event ones ahead of time, I was like, right, I need to get my thinking hat on, need to understand what we're doing here. I need, you know, how am I going to fight that list? And there's a few there that I'm like, there's no fighting in that list. There's no. But yeah, so that would be quite interesting. I'm looking forward to seeing how that runs.
That's going to be really interesting. Like we haven't had an event like that. Obviously, we like to share what our thought process is during the list building through to the community, but that's more about of a drive to get people talking about and excited about the event, and that to realize that here's the thought process we take. So you know, there is quite a lot of thought into something that how Gorchin would make a list, or Jackson, or whatever else. But you can understand the decisions they made and as to why, and it really helps you understand how you can design your list to suit you, what works for them, why did they choose these things. That's not just arbitrary, and it's not just you know, it's not this crazy science that you could never comprehend on how things were made. So I really like the fact that we've been doing that for quite a while, but we've never seen an events list pack pre-event, to my knowledge.
No, generally I have always kept them, you know, behind the curtain, so to speak. And there's a few different reasons for that. One of them is, you know, it brings a bit of suspense on the day.
Definitely.
We always, we probably could have done it, to be honest, because a lot of the events that we would have run before with the different restrictions in place, none of the lists were cheese. None of the lists were overpowered. None of the lists were gross. Okay, the very, very, very first one that I ran when we started getting back on the horse, you know, 3 and a bit years ago, yes, we did have a bamboo spearman list there, which was just...
Not fun.
It was a bamboo spearman list. But but we haven't actually, like, I think we've had 1 or 2 squads of bamboo spearmen that have come through throughout the remainder of the last bit of time.
Not the 100
not a whole
minis.
platoon's worth.
Yeah.
You know, but I do think that taking the multiple small units and getting everyone's view of, you know, people thought they were putting in high dice totals at sort of, you know, 14 and 16 around that place. They're going, oh, it's, you know, it's a bit more than 12. And I'm going, that was 24. But it's sort of, it's something that we don't see a lot of in Perth. I think it's going to be really good of us all to go down and enjoy.
Try something different.
Yeah, and you know, and you touched on it briefly as well. Like, one of the reasons that multiple small unit stuff works, or can work, it's not proved by me yet, but it can work, is also down to the different sort of board presence and board control you can have, where it simply is, I have more dice than you, ergo I have more chances to put a pin on your units before you have a chance to put a pin on mine. And by using that as a form of board control, simply the number of dice that are there, the cost generally is that you have to make them inexperienced, which means that those pins are a little bit harder to come by.
Well, I'm excited to see how it goes for you.
Yeah.
Really, really good to see that the Perth community has embraced the Albany gaming crew, because as most of us would know, the players are going to be traveling 4 to 5 hours to get there. These guys have always been very present at all the Perth City events, so they've been making the effort for a long time.
Yeah, I think they've only missed one of the formal events, and then maybe a couple of the smaller pieces that weren't necessarily big formal events. They were just things we did on the side. But literally for all of the big formal ones that we've sort of pulled together to run, they've always had virtually some form of representation, be it 1 or 4 guys or 3 guys or whatever. So I'm looking forward to returning the favour and sending a few of us down there to have a bit of a dice off.
And they've got plenty of players too, so it seems like a lot of people in Perth have got the same idea.
Yep. So my understanding at the moment, after looking at the player count from Gilly, who's obviously got the prop account, so because I'm a player, I'm not a TO.
Yes.
I get to play. We're at 17 with, and it's a 2-day event, which is the first 2-day event really that we've had of the same bolt action thing in almost the 3 and a bit years. The only 2-day events that we've done previously have been, like I did one which was a regular bolt action event and then a tank war event that were consecutive days, but I don't count those.
That would be
technically
an
2 events.
We
did a couple of our campaign days that were spread across multiple days, but they weren't consecutive, so that doesn't count. This will be the first one I think that we've done that'll be actually 2 days worth of gaming, and we're doing it 2 games on the Saturday, 2 games on the Sunday, so a very relaxed schedule as well.
That's really good. Cool. I think we will leave it there. This is the first Jack Daniel's special. Take that, gin and tonic. We'll catch you next time, hopefully with a full crew. Probably all about Southern Thrust, because most of the crew will be at that event. Be really cool to catch up on that. And then we've got another one. Well, we got Band of Brothers hosted by Gorgon. Is that the...
We got Band of Brothers hosted by Gorgon, which is our first teams event. So we've done doubles before, but this is actually teams of 3 players. That's coming through. Unfortunately, I couldn't play in that one. But it looks very, very good. I'm really excited to see how everyone takes that piece up and what we decide to do as a community moving forward with those sorts of events. And then we also have the Combined Arms campaign that'll be kicking off for RHG. Well, RHG and whoever wants to take part, to be fair.
Definitely. So I think you've got a little unboxing video about Combined Arms up on Western Tabletop. Please do check it out. But a call out to anybody in Bolt Action Perth. Please do get in touch with Dan. we're really
Yep.
excited to really get involved with Combined Arms. So it's Warlord's campaign system that is designed to link all of their various World War II games together.
And I've taken it on a little bit of a detour in the sense that it can actually accommodate any World War II system as well. So I've initially got it set for 8 players, which will be 2 generals and 6 majors that report into those generals. But we also have a reserve list function. So even if you can't make every single game or every single day, or you can't commit to, the 2-month time frame to get the games done or whatever, that's fine. You can sign up on the reserve list, and you may or may not get drafted in to cover for somebody or to have a additional battle as things escalate. But that's the purpose of that reserve list, is so you don't have to commit to the whole time. So,
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Look, more options to play bolts. It's not like that we're short of them. We're very, very lucky in Perth that this whole time over the last few years, it's just been exploding. Yeah. Everybody is very interested in this game, and I hope that's the same for many of our viewers wherever you are in the world. And please tell us about your local scenes, what events are happening there, what interests you, and topics that you'd like us to cover. So I'm Jacob, and I've got Daniel on the call with me. So this is the HMG podcast. You can find us on YouTube/Western Tabletop. We're on all the various podcast platforms. Just search for HMG Podcast or Historical Miniature Gamers. Follow us on Facebook. And please do reach out to us, Facebook, YouTube, comments, all that kind of thing. We're really keen to see what you have to say and what you'd like to see from us moving forward. So this is our J&D special. See you next time.
See you next time, guys.